So when they think about the early levels of teaching, it's a little bit like parenting, I think, that you're telling them a lot of stuff. You're giving out a lot of information in those early levels. And probably the balance is a little bit more towards do what I tell you, than do whatever you want. Eventually you want them to figure things out for themselves, practice for themselves, make decisions for themselves, figure out their own bowings, their own fingerings, their own interpretation. It takes years to get to that point. That's what we kind of eventually want in a truly independent musician that we all try to be. But at the beginning, we have to find some kind of balance between saying, I'm going to give you some choice in what you do here, and saying, just put your feet like this. Put your bow at the frog, curve your pinky, things like that. At the beginning, I think it is important that we are giving them defined things to do, that we have learned from our experience, kind of works for us as teachers. Now, as teachers, we are always experimenting and changing our ideas about what we're going to suggest for our students, because we get ideas our whole life as teachers also. So if you're starting with a beginner and you want to say, make a V and take a step, you can tell that child, okay, this is how we're going to stand. Put your feet together, make a V, and take a step. And it gives them something to hang on. And that's a pretty just literal thing. Do these 3 steps like I just told you to. But I always like to try to include with anything that I give them that's that specific, I'm giving them some kind of reason for it, even if they don't get it at the time. We're putting our feet together, we're going to make a V, we're going to take a step, and our shoulders are over our hips, and our hips are over our feet, and we're going to, sway like a tree, and we're feeling balanced. And you want to start using this language with them of being balanced and flexible and free from the very beginning, because that's a concept that you want to carry through their whole lives. And at the beginning, they're not really processing balance. It takes years to understand what is balance. But that doesn't mean you can't say it. So I think when you're working with kids, again, it's like parents. You tell them the right things. You tell them the things that make sense. You tell them the concepts of what you believe in, that you want things to fall under. And they may not really get that for many, many years, but that doesn't mean that you don't still say it. So you just have to be careful with young ones that you don't give them too much information. So you may be able to then say, and think of Alexander and standing like this, and your body works like that, and blah, 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 blah. If you give them too many words, it's overkill. So that's one of the balances of teaching, I think, is a challenge. You have so much knowledge in your head. How much are you going to actually verbalize with a young child? So you have to minimize the words and do more with physicality, feeling, imitation, and copying, and just keep going out and repetition. So for those children who you ask them to do that and they go like this and they don't really get it, you just smile and you do it every week. Repetition, you just do it every week. And a couple years later it's a little bit better, and eventually a kid who doesn't know how to put his shoulders over his hips, eventually, maybe he'll get it. And it just takes years. And sometimes with some students that concept is going to take a really long time, and with some they might get it right away, and it doesn't really matter how long it takes. You just keep doing it, you smile, and you just do it again. When we're talking about the standing, if you're talking about, say, we put a little X here and say sliding on your magic X, we're doing that so that we can be loose. If we're putting the violin on the shoulder and saying keep your magic X here so you can drop your fingers, it's not like you're just going to say put your hand like this because I told you, but you want to give them some concept. There's a reason for what you're telling them. And so maybe you want to say, well, we can't reach our fingers if our magic X is under, but if it's here, we can drop our fingers. And we want to drop our fingers when we play the violin. You can tell that to a beginner. And then later, that concept is going to come back over and over and over again as they develop. You can say things like, your hands have to be relaxed in order to move. Just try tensing up your hand. Can you move it? No. Relax your hand. Can you move it? Oh, yeah, that's easier. So concepts of relaxation over tension. Same thing with the violin or the bow on the violin. You're working with a young child on having a flexible bow hold. And you just say things like, well, the violin is holding up the bow, so you don't really have to hold it. It's like if you put a glass of water on a table, you don't have to go like this and keep it there. You can let go. The table is going to hold up that glass. It's the same kind of thing. You set your bow at the frog, you can kind of let go. The violin is holding it up. You can take your thumb off. You don't have to squeeze. And your sound is going to be better if you don't push up on that thumb. So you're giving them specific things to do. Set your bow at the frog, wobble, tap your first finger, take your thumb off, whatever it is that you're telling your students when you're starting. You're trying to ingrain a good sense of balance and sensory memory. So telling a child, put your bow at the frog, curve your pinky, relax. Okay, do that this week when you go home. Okay, next. That's not going to get you very far. You have to have an experiential session with a young child. You have to get your hands on their hands. You have to go like this. You have to try to sense where it is in their body to let go of those muscles. And if you do this over a course of time, they will eventually start to sense things and feel when they're loose and find where that is. And as you all know, some children are have a higher level of body awareness and coordination earlier, and some kids develop that a little bit later. And so as teachers, we have to kind of read again that balance. So some children, you can have them do this and they get what you're talking about right away. Another child, you can have them do this and they're like this, and you say, relax your arm, and they go like that. And you say, are you relaxed? And they say, yes. and you can see that they're not. But you can also see that they haven't quite felt that yet. They don't know quite where that is yet. It's going to take a while. So it's just going to take longer. And we have to watch out in ourselves that we are impatient if they don't understand it. Somebody said something to me once. I'm going to see if I can remember what it was. It was like, patience, don't use the word patience as a teacher, because saying I'm being patient with this child implies frustration. It means that truly you're frustrated and you're really holding it in and trying to show patience and not get angry that their arm has been like this for the last 5 years and you've been trying to change it. And I've thought a lot about that difference between being frustrated and being patient. And I think what it helped me understand was, if I'm really in tune with the process of where that child is, then I'm not frustrated about it. I'm just aware that they're not aware yet. And we're trying to become more aware. Now that'll change again later with teenagers. With older, if they understand something, this is a really key difference. If they don't understand something, if they don't understand what a C sharp is and a C natural is, if they don't hear that that's out of tune, it doesn't bother them. You can't be angry at them for playing out of tune. They don't get it yet. You have to spend time. Do you hear that? Oh, there it is. There it is. Too high. Do you hear it? There it is. Oh, now I hear it. You have to help them develop the awareness to know the difference. So if they're scratching about and they're perfectly happy, they're not aware of their sound yet. They're just not aware. They're not aware. They wouldn't do it. They're not aware. And so you can, that's when you say, okay, let's play Too Close to the Bridge. Do you like that sound? Oh, no, because at first they're not even listening. They're just going like that. And it's like, oh, no, I don't like that. Oh, yeah, I like that better. Well, let's discover how to make that. And then you can find it again at home. So I find a lot in the early levels is helping them be more aware of what's going on in their violin. Listen to that sound. Do you hear the string ring? Do you like the sound? Is it scratching? Oh, let's figure out why, and then there are, of course, things that we work on with that. But I think that idea of physical oral awareness for intonation, tone, flexibility, all of that, I spend a lot of time with that in the early levels. It's almost more important than like what song they're playing. Well, everything's more important than what their song they're playing. How is it beautiful? Is it beautiful? Is it flexible? Is it beautiful? And if you work on that, and I think I'll take questions later if that's okay. If you work with that, I think then they become more responsive inside the lesson. So that then, when they come in 1 week and something doesn't sound good, and you can say, well, let's check your levels, let's check your bow speed, let's listen to that. They know, they have a language for being able to respond. So that's, I guess, the first thing I would say about the early level. You're kind of giving them instructions, but you're also developing a language that you're going to use through their whole development. In your earlier stages, they learn a lot by visual, oral, imitation is really helpful in young levels. And of course, we all know children learn differently, so some people like clear explanations in words and some prefer, visual. But I think everybody has a little of all of that in them, so I'm just throwing at it all fire at them in all different ways when they're young. And you'll kind of sense, that's part of your awareness, is for those of you that are younger teachers, part of how you want to develop as a teacher is developing awareness of what's actually really going on with that child. Sometimes it's very easy as a young teacher in particular to say, well, here's somebody told me to leave your 2 down on that piece, or, go to the frog on that piece, and those are all real good things, and I teach pedagogy and I tell everybody all the same stuff. But when it comes to the end, there's no one trick for one song. You have to be aware of what each individual child is doing in terms of their relationship to the instrument, and what their hands are like, and what their bow is like, and you make your adjustments. So at the little kids especially, doing copycat is very helpful. Of course, you imitate, you play something, and you have them play it back, and they're listening, and they're trying to copy your sound and rhythm or whatever. Let them go first. Don't always just give information. You want to start giving them opportunities at an appropriate level for making choices and making things up. So if you're doing copycat with them, make sure you say, now you do one for me and I'll copy you. Let them be the leader. It's really important to start that early. I've seen lots of kids who've never had that until they're older, and they're really afraid, because they're afraid to do something wrong. They're afraid that there's a right and a wrong. They're afraid the parent is watching and will think it wasn't a good choice. They're afraid of doing something. And so I always just light them up. I don't care what you do. I don't care what sounds. I'll just do 3 notes. I don't care what 3, and I'll try to copy you. And as they become more comfortable with that, they develop confidence in their abilities. Another thing that's very helpful, and I'm sure you all do it in your lessons, is alternating measures. So if you're practicing, have them play, then have you play, and do a lot of alternating repetitions. It's another way of saying, I want you to play this right now, and this is how I want you to play it. But you're giving the back and forth. You're giving the back and forth, and you're playing with them, and they're hearing you, and there's not a lot of verbal instruction when you do that. They're just listening and copying. And you might, push their arm down, or say use more bow, or make a clear martelé, but basically you want to get in a loop of playing back and forth without too much energy. Shadow bowing in the air while they're playing can be very helpful. So they're playing a song and their bowings are messed up. You do the bowing in the air because they'll learn that peripherally. Conduct them, sing along, clap the rhythm. I do a lot of that with these young kids, because if you just stand there silently while they play something and things are askew, if you spend 4 minutes letting a young child play a piece, well, they wouldn't be playing pieces that long, but if you just let them play a lot of pieces straight through and the rhythms aren't quite right and they don't have a sense of pulse, you're kind of wasting time after a while. Just get in there and tap the pulse and let them feel the pulse. Sing the rhythms, conduct them. They will eventually start to learn where downbeats feel and all of this kind of thing. So that's all demonstration, imitation. So the question then kind of becomes, what's so independent about that? And the answer is, yeah, not much. But the point is that they have to develop a language before they can make good choices about anything. It's kind of like, say, telling a child who doesn't speak French to go write a poem in French. If they don't know the language, they can't write a poem in it. So you have to develop a sense of language and start giving them little choices. When I'm working on intonation with young kids, I'm always moving their fingers for them. I might play a chord on the piano with my left foot on the piano, and then they're here and they play a note, and I move their finger if it's in and out of tune, and we go, is that in tune? Is that out of tune? Do you hear? I'm going to make it too high. Can you fix it? I'm going to make it too low. And then I have them switch the tables, and I'll play out of tune, and I'll let them move my finger for me. And so we do, let's you be the teacher. Can you move my finger in tune? Do you see what I have to do? I have to be so loose. If I press too hard, it doesn't move. Can you move it? No. What should I do? Make it lighter. Ask them the question. What should I do to fix it? I keep hitting the E string. What's wrong? And they'll come over and go. They're usually not very gentle. But I find that even with that, I have a little 4-year-old actually I'm working with right now, and I did that the other day because her arm was too high, and she came over, and man, with me, she knew exactly what to do. She's fixing my fingers, and then I do with her, and she's like not changing her finger, not one bit, but she's like aware of the concept, but her own finger, she's a little bit tight, so it's not sliding yet. So she's aware of the concept, but she hasn't quite integrated into herself. But I'm happy to know she's aware of it, because sometimes you can, if you don't ever ask them to check it out on somebody else, you don't know whether they understand it or not, like up here. So that can be valuable. Have them clap and sing while you play. Get them involved in that way. Play a note, play a little piece and say, I'm going to play one note out of tune. Which one did I play out of tune? Let them say, oh, your 2 was too low, or your 3 was too high. See what they're listening. When you're in lessons with young kids, you have to do all the repetitions in the lesson, tons of repetitions in the lesson. And actually, I have to say that doesn't really stop. I find I even have to do that with high school kids, but it changes a little bit. I think that the repetitions in the lesson for the younger child is a little bit more you telling them what you want to hear. So again, if they're playing, I might say, let's see if we can get that 2 a little higher. Did you hear that? Okay, that was better. Do that again. And then I'll say, let's make a stop your bow in the martelet. Let me hear you do that. Good, now let's put that together. Great, now let's do that 5 times. But I'm doing the assessment. In other words, I'm telling them the 2 was too low, or the martelet wasn't stopped clearly, or I'm making those decisions in between the repetitions. And I'm telling them what to fix. Okay, and I think that's the first step. You're helping them become aware of what just happened. And as it goes on later, I'm going to have them give me that feedback more. But in this early level, I'm giving that feedback, asking for what will sound better, and doing it 5 or 10 times, or however much they can tolerate in the lesson to get it to sound better in the lesson. So if you don't get something to sound better in the lesson, you can be guaranteed it will never sound better at home. And even if you can get it to sound better in the lesson, you are not guaranteed that it's going to come back the next week and start at the level as it ended after you did your repetitions, right? So we all know that. But you have to keep doing that, because then they will start to want to hear that sound. So if they come in and they start, playing with, I'm not going to listen to not 3 notes more of that. Not going to happen. I'm just not going to hear it. I'm going to set that bow at the front. Let's, set here, take a big breath. Let's use a hobo. Let's use a hobo. Let's go for that sound. I don't want to hear that sound in the lesson. I just want to listen to it. It's like if they're playing really out of tune. If they're playing the first 5 notes out of tune, just don't hear the rest of the piece. I just stop. And let's get that first note in tune. Do you hear it? Yes, okay, let's go on. Oh, let's stop and check that A with your open string. Whatever you are tolerating in the lesson, they're going to do. Does that make sense? Whatever you tolerate, they're going to do at home. And they're going to do in their development. Forget about practicing at home, because they're not getting a whole lot sometimes at this stage. But if you don't if you stop and fix things that are out of tune, they will learn for it to bother them. And if you don't ever stop for it, it won't bother them. They'll just play out of tune and it doesn't bother them. It doesn't bother them. So you have to show them in a nice way. Let's stop and check that. Do you hear that? Oh, that was a little scratchy. Let's try that again. Do you hear that? And then you'll eventually you'll hear them, when you hear, when they stop and recorrect in the lesson, that's a great moment of any kind, whether it's intonation, or they restart something, or they start the scale and instead of going, they go. That's always a great moment for me. You know, when they start their scale and, you know, they go like this. I tell them, that's what you have to do before every time you start at the beginning. Do they do it at home? No, you know, probably not. But if they know that I'm going to stop them before they even get to the tip and start it over, they eventually will train to do that. And eventually they'll like the feeling, and they'll look for that on their own. And it could take years. It could take years, but don't be worried about that. Eventually it will happen. Independence with regards to bowings and fingerings at the beginning. At the very beginning, zero independence. At the very beginning, we're telling them this is a 2, this is a 3, and you're going to use a half bow, or you're going to use a whole bow, or you're going to go martelé, or you're going to go détaché, and you're developing basic skills, and you're telling them what to do. At a certain point, you want to start helping them be aware of rules and concepts, and help them notice them. So when they're learning the 4th finger and you're playing, you could say, well, you can play an open because we're going up. But if you're playing a piece with the goes like that, of course you're going to play the 4 because you can stay on one string. So that's the kind of thing. You don't just tell them play 4 here, play open, play 4, play open. You're going to introduce them to that concept. This is why we're playing a 4 here, because a lot of times we like to stay on one string. This is why we're playing open, because we're going to go up anyway. Now we all know that there could be 1,000, exceptions. We're not dealing with exceptions in working with young children. We're trying to develop just good basic rules, and then you break them later, like any good teenager. So first you have to have basic rules. So one of the first rules I'll break, I like to do a lot of whole bow and half bow at the beginning of, like at the end of book 1, I'm working pretty much in whole bows and half bows, which, after hearing the Baroque people, it's almost embarrassing. But they're not ready for that yet, but I love all of that. I absolutely 100% love and agree with everything that they said. And then you have to realize you're beginners, you're not going to play like that, right? So when they're playing, whole, half, half, whole, half, they're going to be doing that. In Minuet 3, I think there's a place where you can play. You can stop the tip and play here. Makes a nice piano. I would specifically say to them, we're going to break our rule here. Instead of always whole bow, half bow, we're breaking our rule here for musical reasons. Because instead of playing whole, I want to be soft, so let's try it here. That's okay. We can break that rule, or we can, let's see right here. Like here, I would start at the middle. And then crescendo, not necessarily at the front. So we're going to break rules for musical reasons, and I talk about that at this level. Practice charts for young kids, I tend to be pretty, do this 5 times, do this 10 times, do this till it's in tune, do this till you can do it 3 times without a mistake, do it, any kind of possible thing that will work. But I always give a place to do whatever you want. And once they've started doing scales, which is basically during Twinkle, we'll do an A major scale with Twinkle bowings. Once they've got to the end of book 1 and they've done a few different bowings, I'll let them make up a bowing for their scales. And usually they look at you like, but especially in book 2 and 3, I'll say, well, take something from one of your pieces and make it in the scale. So let's say we're doing, witch's dance. Well, we can play a scale. And so I started book 2 having them pick a scale bowing out of their piece. So normally I'm doing half bows, whole bows, slur 2, martelé, and legato, and the whole usual kind of routine. But I start asking them to look for a bowing out of their piece. and make that up. And then I eventually will let them pick always any scale bowing they want. You can do it 24 notes down bow, you can do it, pizzicato, you can do it, even if it's something we haven't learned yet, I don't care. Just that they know that they can have a creative piece in their scale practice makes it kind of fun for them. So that would be kind of where I am with the elementary level kids. Pretty much trying to give them a good language to work with and giving them some kind of choices inside the practice. And it might be about a fingering or just an explanation. It might be about a bowing. It might be about the order that they practice, that they don't do their practice chart in the same order every day. It might be that they always have something where they get to do whatever they want or make up a song or anything they want. Any kind of little thing that you're going to learn something from them about what's fun for them, what's funny to them, what's interesting.